Welcome everyone to this session on cyber espionage, which I think is quite a fascinating and exciting topic. As you may have all seen in the news recently and on various occasions, cyber espionage has reached unprecedented levels to the point of becoming today a global threat, not only for states but also for private organizations and in particular critical national infrastructures, as we call it. And it of course has become a real cybersecurity issue and a challenge. But the good news is there are solutions to try to prevent that risk, to mitigate the risk, and to deal with the consequences. And this is what we're going to discuss today with our three speakers that Fanny briefly presented. Howard Marshall, you are Global Cyber Intelligence Lead at Accenture. Paul Laurier, you are the CEO of Vigitech. And Steve WATERHOUSE, cybersecurity speaker and consultant now, but you've done many other things in the past that you may touch upon in our discussion today. And the first question, I guess, I want to ask Howard is, we have seen that cyber espionage takes many forms and has various drivers behind it. What are the main trends of cyber espionage today?
First, thank you, Amélie, for having me. And thank the INCYBER Forum for allowing me to join with you today. This is really a fascinating question right now. I didn't want to make sure everybody understands the perspective I have and where it comes from. Prior to my current role, which I've had for 5 years, I was an FBI agent for almost 23. And so I had a really good chance to kind of see this from the inside and see the tools that the government could bring to bear, understand the cases, and the perspectives of adversaries. In commercial space, what I've noticed over the last 5 years is this idea of being data-driven and data-led, in not just in cyberspace, but it's kind of the confluence of cyber and physical security. And I think we've all known for a very long time that our adversaries are not content to simply attack us in cyberspace. But indeed, when you think about industrial espionage, we've known for years, maybe even decades, that our adversaries are putting people actually in our own organizations. They're tasking them almost as if they're doing their own type of collection and analysis of data. But Amélie, to your point about what kind of mitigation strategies are out there, I think first you have to get folks to recognize the significance of the threat. It has continued to grow. It is now a practice of both nation-state adversaries and indeed cyber criminals, and their methods are varied, and they're always trying to stay one step ahead of defenders. So really, it's about teaching people, both from my government side and now from the commercial space, teaching them about what the threat is and about how they need to address it. First and foremost, we're talking about setting baselines for human behavior. Understanding what people do on a day in and day out basis. What's an anomaly versus what's routine behavior? Like if you think about this in terms of cyber space, and even think about it in terms of a SOC, right? False positives do us no good. So identifying good behavior from bad behavior and taking the time to learn what kind of data you have as an organization, how it can be manipulated, and then how it can be enriched by cyber intelligence. So there's a couple of thoughts about the trends of where we are. We are seeing both on the commercial side, and then I still have a foot in the government. The trend is the activity is continuing, and it's probably even growing as attackers begin to identify different vulnerabilities. So companies are expanding, companies are moving now. We're seeing a flight from China after years and years and years of moving there. And every time you either acquire a new company or move the situs of your business or your operations, it opens up new doors to new threats. So that's kind of what we're seeing, again, both from the government side and the commercial side.
Yeah, many thanks, Howard. I think we'll have the occasion also to expand on this point later in the session. Steve, what's the situation today? What maybe are the impacts of recent geopolitical moves?
The question is about?
About the sorry, but we were talking about the trends. So, what is the situation of cyber espionage today?
Well, cyber espionage, and I'll translate. I'll go in French on this question. Bon, on y va comme ça. Alors, la cybersécurité, la manière qu'on doit le comprendre aussi, il faut comprendre premièrement la cybermenace. Comme Howard le mentionnait, je veux dire, il y a un contexte international qui vient autour de qu'est-ce qui peut venir à ce moment-là s'intéresser au développement économique, au développement industriel. Et après ça, comme on a été victime ici au Canada depuis les vingtaines de dernières années, c'est la propriété intellectuelle qui est aspirée puis qui est amenée à l'extérieur. Et nous ici, bien, on en devient à ce moment-là à la remorque des événements. On n'est plus un leader comme on l'a été en télécommunication, mais on devient justement une personne, une organisation, un pays qui devient justement tributaire de qu'est-ce que le reste du monde va produire. Alors, ça commence avec chaque individu de comprendre que la technologie moderne qu'on utilise au quotidien bien, peut être le point de départ pour être cette fuite d'informations que d'autres pays, que d'autres organisations, autant étatiques que criminelles, vont à ce moment-là s'en servir à ce moment-là, leur amener des bénéfices clairs et nets. Mais que nous, ici, bien, on va continuer à être en posture de défense parce qu'il faut cesser d'être à un moment donné en posture de défense. Il faut ici innover, il faut ici aller vers l'avant pour être en mesure de pouvoir développer ces meilleures pratiques, développer au moins une meilleure technologie. Et c'est pour ça que si on demeure éternellement à la remorque des événements, bien, on est voué à l'échec perpétuel.
And speaking of anticipating and being ahead, Howard, how can intelligence can help detect those risks of cyber espionage?
Sure. So when you think about intelligence and what it's designed to do, it is designed to get, in law enforcement parlance, it's designed to get you left of bang, right? What is it that you're trying to, understanding what you're trying to protect, understanding how you're protecting it, and then understanding the requirements that help you identify the data and the information intelligence that you need to either validate your security posture or drive change. So the idea of getting, again, left of bang and understanding those things and building requirements that are going to drive collection efforts, it was going to give you that sight picture. And you need to think about intelligence in two terms, right? You think about the tactical, which is the day-to-day operational type of things that intelligence can inform on, and I mentioned the SOC earlier, and I would use that as an example now. What are the red lights that are going off and flashing, and what do they mean, and how do we identify them and then either mitigate them or investigate further? But I think where a lot of companies, a lot of organizations globally are going to is the strategic application of intelligence. So when we gather all of these insights and we understand what they're telling us, what can we do with that intelligence at a higher level? So thinking about how do we build intel into a manufacturing process? How do we utilize intel to conduct mergers and acquisitions? How do we use intelligence to respond to compliance demands and shifts in global security posture or new technologies, right? Everybody's all aflutter now talking about AI. What does that mean for your business or your organization? So again, the strategic end is generally where we see, and when I say we, I mean both in the government and then even at Accenture, it's where we see organizations not taking full advantage of what's out there. There's a lot of free intelligence that's out there, right? There are a lot of free data feeds. There are lots of things that our clients can do to exploit stuff that's simply free. But it's about changing the culture and the mindset of the organization to accept what Intel is sharing with them and then responding in kind. And again, the best use case example I can give you, and we're seeing this happen right now in real time. It happens about every month or two. We have a significant breach somewhere in the world that comes through a supply chain. So are there opportunities, are there tools that will allow you to do alerting in real time for that tactical advantage, but also the strategic side of it is can you understand kind of holistically from an industry level, right, what's happening, what attacks are going on, who the adversary is. Those are the types of things that we want our clients to be thinking. in terms of driving forward.
And in very sort of practical ways, which are the tools or methods that you use to detect?
Sure. So I don't want to necessarily use any specific vendor, but I will tell you the places that we've seen the most benefit at the tactical level has been using tools that are doing dark web scraping, using tools that are doing open web scraping, using tools that cover down on social media. Every sophisticated government that has an intel component has the ability to do, use confidential human sources, right? So developing sources in places that have access to information that help you understand more about your collection requirements. So it's a little bit in identifying the right tools to do that front end alerting, and it's a little bit about the back end as well, where it's the strategic application, right? So how are we going to use all this alerting to inform all of those other things that we just talked about? The last thing I'll put a pitch in for is making contact with law enforcement on a regular basis, or intelligence, intelligence shops, government intelligence shops around, wherever it is our clients are doing business, and make that routine contact actually mean something. Ask the people that you're talking to what they're seeing. Tell the people you're talking to what you perceive to be threats. But develop a relationship that's personal in nature, even if you don't have anything hugely important to pass, and vice versa. Getting to know these folks and understanding what they need, especially, God forbid you find yourselves on the wrong end of a breach, what's going to happen? When I was with the FBI, the question I always got from commercial space was, so when you guys come out and respond, you're going to bring a big giant truck that says FBI, and you're going to have FBI agents all over the place, and the news media is going to pick this up. That's not what happens. And I would encourage folks to make those contacts all over the world, to understand the process behind it, to understand what's of importance and value to them. That's something that's free and it's easy to do.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's therefore much about human interactions in a way. And I think, Paul, this is something that you can expand on. Maybe what's the role of the human in this, the individual into this, into the dynamic of cyber espionage? What sort of role can the individuals play?
Merci de l'invitation. En fait, moi, ce que je vois dans ma pratique, j'ai été policier, j'ai été à Quantico, on m'a formé sur les attaques, on m'a formé sur plein de plateformes, comment se défendre, mais en fait, dans la réalité où les enquêtes qu'on a menées depuis une dizaine d'années maintenant chez Vigitech, je vous dirais que la composante humaine est toujours le facteur le plus important et le plus difficile à détecter. Et c'est toujours quelqu'un à l'intérieur, pas toujours, mais dans 90-15% des cas maintenant, on va avoir, puis monsieur parlait tantôt du supply chain, il y a toujours quelqu'un à l'intérieur qui va vous poser un problème. Et souvent pour les gestionnaires, les TI, tout ça, les gens qui vont faire le développement, on a de la propriété intellectuelle, on est des petites entreprises, des grandes entreprises, on va développer énormément de produits qui vont prendre des années, puis là, on va mettre ça sur les tablettes où on va avoir des morceaux d'innovation qui vont apparaître, qui vont disparaître ou qui vont être mis de l'avant par les ventes. Puis là, comment on le protège? Il y a un paquet de facteurs, mais je vous dirais que techniquement, c'est relativement facile. Mais le facteur humain, il faut être capable de dire que l'an 1, quand on a pris un employé qu'on amène dans l'entreprise parce que c'est un bon développeur, parce que c'est un bon manager, parce que c'est une bonne personne, ça se peut que dans l'an 2 ou dans l'an 3, bien, cette personne commence à avoir des problèmes, commence à jouer, commence à avoir des problèmes d'alcool, commence à avoir des... Et ça, les entreprises ne sont pas prêtes à prendre cette décision. On le voit avec les RH, difficulté d'avoir du personnel. C'est quand on a des personnes, on est content, sauf qu'il y a des déviances qui sont importantes. Il y a des gens qui vont changer de posture et puis là, qui vont commencer à être en porte-à-faux avec l'entreprise. Et puis là, bien, vous avez les entreprises ont investi 1, 2, 3 millions de dollars, des milliards, pas des milliards, mais des millions de dollars. J'ai un cas où ça s'est ramassé. On a un dossier que j'ai fait récemment, un vrai cas où on s'est ramassé avec une entreprise qui a mis probablement une vingtaine de millions en développement, puis ça s'est ramassé directement en Iran. puis une copie conforme en Iran, alors que les gens, bon, c'était des bonnes personnes, jamais. Et quand on est arrivé, ben c'est compliqué parce que là, il y a un feu. Deux, ce qu'on apprend au FBI, à Quantico, log, l'entreprise ne l'a pas fait. Les secrets ne sont pas bien protégés. On n'a pas pris le temps de dire, ben j'ai un joyau, c'est arrivé, c'est un bijoutier, on ne vous met pas une montre Rolex sur le comptoir. Il y a des portes de sécurité, mais quand on est à l'intérieur, on est un employé, bien, ces gens-là ont accès à la montre Rolex ou ont accès aux diamants directement. Il faut être capable de contrôler ce qui est de l'extérieur, mais aussi des intérieurs. Et c'est une culture à avoir. C'est pas d'être suspicieux. C'est sûr que quand on est un ancien flic, on est comme plus méfiant. Il y a de la méfiance, mais jamais rien prendre pour acquis. Et puis les gens ne font pas nécessairement ça à l'intérieur, mal intentionnés. Souvent, il va arriver quelque chose sur le côté, une vie familiale plus compliquée, un événement traumatisant, puis là, la personne va changer son comportement. Et là, c'est vraiment difficile.
Et quelles sont à la fois les motivations, mais aussi les modes opératoires?
Bien, souvent, ça va être, je vous dirais que les modes opératoires, le danger numéro un dans le secret des industriels, c'est ça. Hein? Comment on voit une entreprise vous amenez votre Bring Your Own Device, puis là, vous avez votre compte cloud qui est branché sur votre nom personnel. Et puis là, bien, tous les documents qui sont transigés sur des courriels qui sont simples, bien, sont envoyés sur un cloud à quelque part qui n'appartient pas à l'entreprise. Je vous dirais que le risque numéro un qu'on voit, bien, c'est des bonnes pratiques. Il faut évaluer, puis là, c'est une gestion de risque. Comment vous donner à un employé un téléphone qui est sécurisé, qui va servir que pour le travail, versus, bien, je vais juste y payer son forfait cellulaire, puis c'est son téléphone. Bien, je le vois encore aujourd'hui, je travaille un dossier, 1,2 million de fraudes, et la personne a sur son téléphone tous les atouts, et c'est impossible d'y aller autrement que par des ordonnances juridiques qui se chiffrent ici au Canada entre 500 et 900 $ de l'heure. Et quand vous calculez la somme pour aller récupérer, c'est faramineux. Il y a des décisions qui sont difficiles à prendre, puis on n'a pas nécessairement de succès parce que celui qui a attaqué le sait très bien, celui qui a fait ça le sait très bien ce qu'il fallait. Et la motivation a été ben, il ne m'a pas augmenté le salaire. C'est souvent des motivations qui sont relativement simples. Je ne suis pas apprécié, mon boss n'est pas fin avec. Il y a plein de... mon équipe ne me comprend pas. C'est souvent des affaires qui sont assez subjectives, qui fait que l'employé va se mettre à dévier. Puis là, bien, comme l'entreprise n'a pas pensé avant et n'a pas de structure de renseignement, n'a pas de structure qui est stricte, qui va dire à l'employé qui arrive, bien, j'ai une surveillance, une certaine surveillance, on ne fait pas ce qu'on veut ici, bien, les employés vont essayer, et les fraudeurs, c'est leur caractéristique, vont essayer bits and bytes, ils vont aller morceau par morceau, vont trouver quelque chose, vont le cacher en dessous du tapis, ils vont aller sur le 2. Puis là, ils vont avancer, ce qui fait qu'ils ont des schémas. Quand c'est découvert, on voit l'amplitude des schémas de fraude, mais difficile si l'entreprise n'a pas pensé avant qu'il y a des joyaux, il y a de l'argent en jeu, puis la technologie facilite l'acquisition de la propriété intellectuelle.
Merci beaucoup. On reparlera en effet de toutes ces façons d'empêcher que ça se produise. Steve, maybe quickly, so we see that the challenge is political, industrial, economic. Concretely, what are the threats against critical national infrastructure, and how can we protect them?
Well, first and foremost, the real threat is not knowing what is the threat, what are the threat actors in play against the critical infrastructure. So as probably most of the people know, critical infrastructure here in Canada is 10 sectors like water treatment, like the financial sector, telco, transport, and so on. That is our society, how it works. And if one of these sectors is hit by something bad, then the economy, then our society, our way of life is directly impacted. So not knowing what's going on, and especially in the various level of governments, you have a misunderstanding of what's to be prioritized in front of the others. What I mean by that is if you do go down to the municipal level, which is the closest government to the people, to the citizens, they're the least they have the least amount of resources, financial and technical, in order to protect what they can provide us close to what we need every day. Just again, water treatment, water processing, but also how the city lives and works. So, and even public transport. So that say, if that is not taken into account by a municipality, but not helped, especially from the higher ups government levels, then it is directly impacting the workers and everybody else that has to be contributing to the society in its whole. So that's one of the first and foremost approach, that knowledge of the threats, knowledge of the threat actors. I come back to that, of course, but it has to be known. And once you know about those, you have to have your technical staff, either they're people coming in from the outside or technical staff inside of the organizations, have to be trained accordingly to deal with the technical techniques and procedures from these threat actors, and so they can apply the best mitigation techniques possible in order to prevent an incident from happening, or at least recover rapidly from one.
Thank you, and I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier, Howard, about the need to anticipate and detect earlier. And also it's about giving the right resources to the people who have responsibility to protect them. Et Paul, quelles sont aussi les bonnes pratiques organisationnelles en termes de ressources humaines qu'il faut mettre en place dans une entreprise justement pour sensibiliser à la fois les employés et la direction au risque et éviter d'avoir ce genre de fuite de la part du facteur humain?
Bien, évidemment, chez les entreprises, et puis ici au Canada, il y avait des statistiques cette semaine qui sortaient. Là, il y a une entreprise sur 10 qui va vivre plus que 10 ans. Donc, on a affaire à beaucoup de start-up, on a affaire à des petites entreprises il y a des moyennes et des grosses entreprises, mais on l'a vu j'ai travaillé sur des dossiers où c'est des gens d'aviation, des entreprises énormes qui ont eu des problèmes, avec le vol de propriété intellectuelle parce qu'effectivement, les mesures étaient en place, mais pas appliquées. Vous pouvez mettre 1 million de mesures, vous avez des employés, vous faites un assessment sur ces gens-là, on va regarder souvent, là, manque d'employés, souvent ce qu'on va faire, bien, il n'y a pas de casier judiciaire, c'est tout, on va l'engager. Alors qu'on ne fait pas aucune des entrevues, c'est important, puis c'est pas juste l'entrevue d'embauche sur la capacité technique de la personne. Le behavior, les personnes, si vous avez une personne qui est sur Facebook, qui ne l'est pas, c'est étrange. Il y a maintenant des comportements où ces gens-là ont des amis, s'informer de l'entourage. C'est important de voir que si on amène des gens qui vont être à l'intérieur de l'entreprise, qui vont avoir accès à de la propriété intellectuelle, à une valeur économique importante, bien, il faut s'assurer que ces gens-là, ont un bon comportement, deux, qui vont être loyaux. Et ça, bien, et malheureusement, ce qu'on voit souvent, particulièrement en IT, les gens vont changer de position, vont changer d'entreprise. Et on le voit souvent, l'entreprise va mettre quelqu'un dehors, il va avoir une entente confidentielle, et puis là, vous engagez cette personne-là. Et quand vous appelez à l'autre place, vous dites comment elle était cette personne-là sur le behavior, bien, on va vous dire que tout est correct. Si vous n'êtes pas capable de décoder, si vous n'avez pas des gens à l'intérieur qui sont capables de décoder qu'il y a eu un problème, puis de poser la bonne question, parce que le sujet qui est en avant de vous, bien, il faut s'assurer de sa probité, mais il faut aussi s'assurer de l'adhésion. Et ça, c'est assez difficile, je vous dirais. Puis c'est sûr qu'ancien policier, on fait des enquêtes, on rencontre des témoins, on rencontre des victimes, on rencontre des suspects. Bien, il y a comme une deuxième nature. Bien, ça, il ne faut pas hésiter chez les entreprises quand on a des postes importants à combler, puis qu'on va donner des secrets industriels, des trésors à des gens, bien, c'est peut-être une bonne pratique d'aller voir des gens qui sont spécialisés puis de conduire les entrevues avec ces gens-là pour s'assurer de la probité. Ça, c'est le premier facteur. Évidemment, tout ce qui est quincaillerie, tout ce qui est le dôme, le cyberdôme, l'entourage technologique, il faut que ça soit aussi sécurisé. On ne fait pas ce qu'on veut, on n'a pas accès à des documents. Et je reviens toujours à Quantico, premier jour, log. Est-ce que les entreprises, il faut être sur les gens des TI, bien, c'est ce que mes employés vont faire, bien, il faut que ça soit suivi. Pas parce que je veux être fatigant, parce que s'il arrive un incident, c'est beaucoup plus facile de retrouver et de stopper l'incident, stopper la fuite d'informations, que de l'apprendre sur le web, faire l'OpenSyn, puis voir que le plan ou de voir que le plan ou la fabrication de la métallurgie est directement implémenté, les mêmes photos, c'est exactement les mêmes boulons, même place dans un pays étranger. Il est vraiment trop tard. C'est des millions qui sont... Puis c'est de la compétition. Puis on voit aussi souvent les employés, ce qu'on voit souvent à l'intérieur, c'est qu'il va y avoir une compétition déloyale. Les gens vont prendre des secrets industriels, qui est de la propriété intellectuelle aussi, puis ils vont partir à côté, vont partir avec une clientèle. Ça, bien, si on n'a pas fait signer les bons contrats, si on n'a pas mis les gens des ressources humaines dans le coup, puis il faut que ça soit quelque chose qui est non discutable, qui est vraiment d'emblée, vous êtes là, vous avez accès à des documents, vous avez accès à de la clientèle. Bien, si vous sortez ces 5 ans, puis vous n'avez pas le droit de concurrence, vous n'avez pas le droit d'y aller, il faut que ça soit des clauses vraiment automatiques et vraiment agressives au niveau légal. Souvent, les RH vont dire non, c'est pas assez, ou les avocats vont dire ben non, c'est trop restrictif. Il faut être restrictif là-dessus parce que souvent, ça arrive. Il y a des conflits à l'interne, il y a des vendeurs qui ne s'aiment pas, il y a des gestionnaires qui ne s'aiment pas. Bien, on va ouvrir l'autre bord de la rue ou dans la ville voisine ou dans le pays voisin. On s'en va aux États-Unis et puis là, on fait les affaires avec les mêmes clients. Et on va aller chercher 10-15 de markup de plus parce qu'on n'a pas eu à développer. Dans les coûts, on n'a pas aucun coût de développement. On a la recette parfaite. Alors, je vous dirais que c'est des enjeux importants. C'est une culture d'entreprise. C'est plate. C'est sûr que quand on arrive dans l'entreprise et qu'on est toujours le bad guy ou bon, ça y est, la police arrive, mais c'est des bonnes pratiques. C'est vraiment, il faut le faire. Sinon, du côté sécurité, ben on s'expose beaucoup. Puis en vieillissant, oui, il y a des gens, on suppose la bonne foi, mais quand la bonne foi n'est pas là, ça devient très, très compliqué. C'est des coûts énormes, ça va jusqu'à des faillites, ça va jusqu'à des fermetures d'entreprise parce qu'on n'a pas fait attention.
Merci beaucoup, Paul. So it's about human resources, it's about processes. What about technologies, Howard? What are the sort of measures, policies, strategies that organizations need to implement to prevent and to mitigate these risks?
Well, so there is a technology aspect of this for sure, but I want to touch on a couple of things that the panelists mentioned. I think your point about organizational awareness, and it goes beyond just the chief security officer role, right? There's a role for HR, there's a role for legal, there's a smaller role maybe for C-suite executives, possibly board members, but understanding that the focus of all of these different parts of your organization need to be brought to bear against this problem. So it's understanding it's more than just the CSO that's the bad guy, right? The cop that shows up and says, you're coming with me, and out the door you go. But I can't tell you how many times we've talked to clients, or even when I was still with the FBI, we find out that, okay, they walk them out of the door, but they still have their access card, they still have their company device, they still have their... So the idea that the protocols in place to manage these types of events, even the FBI, it took us until almost 2016 to create an insider threat section that was run by a senior executive service member. Like, it finally got the importance it needed. But it isn't just the CSO, it's the culture of the company that has to accept the fact that this is a for real threat. We talked about prioritization a little bit, and I'll start back with Intel, and I know this isn't directly tech related, but that's part of what Intel should be helping you to do, right? I keep coming back to left of bang, but one of the other aspects of intelligence at a strategic level is the ability to prioritize, right? In generic terms, right, to rack and stack, threats, and understand that most organizations, right, security is a cost center, right? You're not making a whole lot of money in security, you're costing the company quite a bit, but how do you focus that limited budget on the most compelling threats and the most compelling TTPs? So it could be tech related, and certainly there's spend there, but understanding adversary intent. We talked about whether it's a political and economic intent or even intel collection, right? Our adversaries are whoever they are collecting against us all the time. We talked about the human element of this. Generally, when you're talking about industrial espionage, you're talking about a human being somehow being involved because they have A, they're corruptible, and B, they have access to the things that are most important to whoever the adversary is. You know, the idea that we, and I think you touched on this, the idea that the human being is the risk here, and that you have people that may sign on in their late teens or early 20s and still be with the same company in 20, 30, 40 years. It's not the same person that you hired 20 years ago. We all grow up and find that different things motivate us, or different, you know, periods of our life we're focused on other things. You talked about addiction, and we talked about gambling. Some people, it's just downright greed. But we're not the same people that we are when we start our professional careers. I know in the government that I work for in the U.S., if you had a top secret clearance, you went through the discomfort of a polygraph exam and then a background check every 5 years, and for some, depending upon a clearance, even more than that. So we always talk about the human being in generic terms about cybersecurity as being the weakest link. You know, the person that clicks on the link, even though you tell them 10,000 times, don't click on links from strangers. But the same thing is true in industrial espionage, right? It's the human being that's our weakest link, and it's because we give so much trust to them and expect them to adhere to what's in the best interest of the company. And for a variety of reasons, they may or they may not. But understanding that, to answer your question about technology, I think a lot of companies need to think, and as distasteful as this is, and maybe even illegal in some countries, about how they monitor their employees. You know, what is it that you're collecting when they're at work? Are you looking at their social media accounts? Are you taking into consideration all these things? And I've oftentimes warn organizations we work with, you're not trying to build something, you know, that's hey gosh, this employee is, you know, sneaking in and out of here, you know, really early or late in the evening and early in the morning, and they're here by themselves. You're trying to build a program, and what you're really trying to do is change the culture. So I think it's a healthy thing to tell employees exactly what it is you're doing, and that you care at that level to ensure that this risk is minimized to the degree you can in fact minimize it. But you know, you have to watch what your employees are doing, and it's an uncomfortable thing for people to understand. It's hard for me to even say it, but if this is your concern, if you have prioritized this threat because of the intelligence you're collecting as your top threat, or in your top 3, 4, 5, then you need to be thinking about technologies that help with surveillance and data gathering.
Yeah, thank you, Howard. And so human beings, individuals, employees are very often the problem, but they can also be the solution, I guess. Steve, what can citizens and companies do to avoid this, data leaks?
First and foremost, you have to know where is your data and what kind of data you're generating. So in many organizations, they lack of having a thorough documentation of what's the data that they have in hand. At the federal government, when I was working in national defense, it was easy. It's a program that's been there for what, 70, 60 years or so. They know, it's the same in the US. They know what's classified information. So it's confidential, secret, top secret, and maybe something else above. And personal information, well, it's something at lower level, but could impact one or many individuals, or maybe some kind of organizations. And again, it's a simple classification. And when you put it in the civilian world, well, you have private information, public one, and confidential information. But if a company cannot even think of classifying their information, they cannot apply the proper protection against it or filter it before it goes to the outside and something like that with mitigation techniques called the data loss prevention systems and so on. So even at a personal level, you are always the architect of what you're broadcasting outside of your realm, your environment, your home, if not the business. So if you cannot properly set, this is a sensitive piece of information, or you cannot ascertain what it is, and think ahead. What will be the impact if I broadcast this somewhere else, or I share this information to someone else, and will someone be negatively impacted by what I transmit outside? So that's the first and foremost, individually, responsibility that we have. We have to think before we send out information, because in this day and age, in the last, 20 years, with social medias, people are just thinking of something and they're just broadcasting it across the internet. And then afterwards they try to retract, and it's quite impossible because the internet has a great memory. So that said, you really have to, especially in the organizations, to prevent that kind of leak of information, be wary of where you put this information and then where it can be handled. Because inside, you can put all sorts of mechanisms, as I said, with a DLP system whatsoever, but fundamentally, if there's nobody that's accountable afterwards about the information that's been manipulated, processed, and then digested and consumed, everybody will keep doing this over and over again, and it's going to be an endless discussion.
Thank you. So it really looks like we're always going back to human responsibility and behaviors. But one last thing, maybe you all have had government positions before joining the private sector. How important is public-private cooperation on these issues, and how law enforcement agencies and private companies can cooperate efficiently to fight against cyber espionage?
Je vous dirais que Howard en a parlé, c'est vraiment la participation entre l'échange d'informations entre le secteur public et le secteur privé, c'est super important. Malheureusement, on n'est pas aux États-Unis ici. Et il y a un peu des chasses gardées, des ministères, des organisations qui gardent l'information à l'intérieur. C'est que souvent, je parlais tantôt de l'Iran, un dossier qu'on a mené, bien, ça a coûté à la cliente. On parle à peu près de 80 000 juste en frais d'avocat pour aller chercher des ordonnances judiciaires qui, autrement, s'il y avait une collaboration avec les policiers, bien, quand les policiers le font, c'est gratuit. Alors, c'est vraiment, il y a vraiment, ici au Canada, les législateurs ont vraiment intérêt à s'asseoir et à partager, spécialement dans les cas de fraude, parce que si on parle de vol de propriété intellectuelle, on parle de fraude, on parle de monétisation, on va parler de transfert d'argent. C'est des cas qui viennent rapidement compliqués. Quand vous avez des avocats à 900$ de l'heure, bien, les gens des finances vont vous arrêter assez rapidement, puis ils vont regarder le budget, puis est-ce que ça met la vie de la compagnie en danger alors que c'est des choses qui devraient être intrinsèques et menées. Comme Canadien, comme ancien enquêteur, il y a toujours un gars du FBI dans l'histoire, mais on a plus de coopération comme enquêteur privé. J'appelle le legal attaché. Si j'ai besoin, au niveau privé, si j'ai besoin de quelque chose aux États-Unis et que, heureusement pour le dossier, et malheureusement pour la personne, il y a un Américain qui ben, je vais tout avoir des États-Unis et ça va être légal et ça va tenir les tribunaux ici, alors que cette culture-là dans les organisations publiques ici n'est pas là. On garde les gens en silo, on garde l'information en silo, je le sais, mais je ne peux pas te le dire, puis je prends des notes sur ce que je te dis. Il y a vraiment, surtout que les cas ne vont pas en s'améliorant, ne vont pas en se simplifiant. Il y a vraiment une collaboration à aller chercher avec le privé, puis il faut que le législateur, et d'ailleurs, on n'est pas capable comme société au Québec et au Canada, on n'est plus capable d'enquêter ce type de crime-là. On n'a pas les ressources, on n'a pas la priorité. Les policiers vont vous le dire, on va faire ce qui saigne, ce qui est normal, mais les cas de fraude sont de plus en plus probants et les fraudeurs le savent, et les gens des autres pays, les Russes, les Chinois, les Indiens pour le Canada, on est rendu. Les Indiens, combien d'entreprises ici ont donné en sous-traitance le développement du code en Inde parce que ça coûtait rien? Bien, ces gens-là, aujourd'hui, sont pris avec un enjeu national de sécurité parce que là, on a une chicane importante avec le gouvernement indien. Donc, mais il faut travailler ensemble. Il faut que le privé vienne à la rescousse du public et le public vienne à la... C'est vraiment... Et c'est sharing information, c'est la base. Et aller prendre un café avec des employés, aller prendre un café avec des partenaires, jaser, entretenir des contacts, autre chose que travailler, c'est important. C'est une culture qui disparaît tranquillement. La pandémie ne nous a pas aidés, mais c'est vraiment... Ça fait partie des bonnes pratiques et ça fait partie des éléments qui vont être importants quand il va y avoir une crise. L'enquête va aller beaucoup plus rapidement, puis on a des alliés, il y a des téléphones qui se font, il y a des courriels qui se font, et l'information va arriver beaucoup plus rapidement. On est capable de stopper. On est la brèche, d'arrêter la progression de la crise.
Merci beaucoup, Paul. Steve, I saw you were nodding and approving quite a few times. Is that something that you observed as well?
Well, of course, because when I left the government of Quebec as a CISO last year, well, in February, in fact, this is one aspect I've put in place, which is a threat intel cell inside of the MCN. And for that reason, it was to, first of all, digest, collect information, and be able to make it available to many departments and ministries, and also eventually, as the minister said this morning, to broadcast this to the whole population at all. So in the U.S., we have CISA that makes great products to inform the industry, the people in general, about prevention, and also about threats, but also the techniques to protect yourselves. You have here the Cybersecurity Center in Canada, but again, in Quebec, there's a need to have this information being digested and transpired to everyone, because of there's that local reality that somewhat is diluted at the national level. So that's one of the things that's very important. As Paul said, you have to get close to whom's at risk and who the people will be concerned by that information. So yes, it all comes back to that cycle of mixing all of this information. But first and foremost, you have to always be aware who are your probable targets and also what's inside. And to Howard, what he was mentioning earlier, you have to make that threat risk assessment something that's cyclic, and it's something that's often done inside of the organization, because most of the time when I do a consultation about interventions and I ask for the documentation inside of a computer network, what I get is, let's say from an old company, well, the topology of the network that was done 10, 15, 20 years ago when it first stood up. So it's quite not at the current level of everything that's complicated now, connected everywhere, but that's a documentation problem, just like Paul said, that often you cannot have access to that log because they don't have the proper system to do it, and because they then foreseen to make this documentation available. So it's a whole thing that you have to go back to the basics of making yourself available, document everything from scratch, and then when you have the worst comes, when worst comes, you're ready for it.
Many thanks, Steve. Howard, how does it work in the U.S., this public-private cooperation?
So yeah, it's well. First off, I would agree with both of you. Incredibly important. Both sides have data that the other side doesn't, and the government, at least in the U.S., has a tremendous amount of it. You think about it, the NSA and the intelligence apparatus of the United States. And while it's very impressive, the amount of data that they gather is raw data until somebody analyzes it. And then you think about, I'll just pick on Accenture because they're my current employer, but 761,000 employees globally. Do you think our information security folks have some data analytics that may help us understand exactly what it is we're looking at? When I was in government, it was very easy for me to understand why we did this, right? In terms of domestic investigative capabilities, the authority rested within the FBI, and the FBI was unwilling. And again, when I was in the government, this made perfect sense. Unwilling to a large degree to be really forward-leaning and sharing. Now, over the years, that got better. But even our relationship with CISA when I was there was a complicated one, because our organizations really have two different mandates, right? CISA's mandate is to push as much impactful information out to the consuming public as humanly possible. The FBI's mission is to essentially investigate people, potentially stop the flow of intelligence. And look, at the end of the day, we want to indict people and put them in prison. Like that's our mandate. So in order to do that, to execute on that, we can't run around and just willy-nilly say, okay, here was the last big, this is the last big IR that the government worked, and here's all the data that we were able to exploit and get. In the U.S. government, we have the National Security Council, and that's where they bring all of the different functions of the federal government and sit down at the same table and try to solve a problem. So, as you can imagine, the FBI has a tool in the toolbox, and it's called indict, or name and shame, or try to put somebody in prison, right? But the military wants to smash infrastructure. Okay, both noble causes. The State Department wants to levy sanctions. and then there's this idea of intel gain, intel loss. Like, okay, guys, this is great. If we do any of these things, what are we going to lose? Is this the only place in the world where we're collecting this information? And if it is, we ought not to publicize this particular attack or the TTPs associated with it. As you can imagine, most like many governments, we work really slow. By the time a decision is made that this has no investigative value, it's really of no value to the public sector, or the private sector. So I move into the private sector, and now I see very clearly why there's always an increasing clamor for more data. Can we declassify things faster? Can we push them out to organizations or even to industries? In the U.S., we have ISACs for industries. Can we get them there? Can we get that information there? So I think it's a push and a pull in most countries in the world. It feels like the advantage is starting to shift to the private side and the commercial side, and the idea is let's get it out faster, and we'll worry about the downside risk later.
Many thanks to the three of you. I think we're reaching the end of that session. Maybe just if you want to remember just a few things, it's understanding where and what your assets are, understanding the threats, and changing cultures in the organizations to, yes, you're nodding, you're approving. So change the cultures in organizations. I think that will be the last word of this session. Thank you very much to the three of you.
Thank you.